Hey, everyone, and welcome to the YoJoeShow Podcast. Hi, Joe. How you doing?
Hey yo, how's it happening? Glad to be back.
Yes, definitely excited. I think today the menu is going to be very interesting, and we will start off with Wall Street versus Main Street. And this is an interesting one. Presidents are typically kind of rated by the level of Wall Street as, when they join and kind of when they depart. Um, Typically, they'll use different metrics. Some of them are actually not very good metrics, but um, the idea is that since a lot of Americans have retirement, so the way Wall Street is doing kind of is representative of the way mainstream is doing. Um, and a lot of criticism of Trump's first administration was that he focused a lot on making life better for the rich and for Wall Street, and he didn't care very much about mainstream, even though it affects people's retirement. Now, the truth is that a lot of people do not have a retirement and do not directly control any assets in terms of stocks or bonds or real estate, etc. So they are basically much more limited to the upside of the economy versus the downside. Like we spoke about inflation in previous episodes, inflation just kills Main Street and is very good for Wall Street because it just means there's more money in the market to go around, which makes the prices of stocks and bonds go up. So what we've seen this time around is Trump basically say, screw Wall Street. Wall Street is a representation of the successes of Main Street. If we fix Main Street, then Wall Street will boom inherently. So his focus has been exclusively on making life better for the middle class and the poor, etc., by bringing factories, bringing jobs, kind of other policies we've seen, enabling energy. Right, the only way to be a successful superpower is to have an abundance of energy, and economies boom the most when there is an abundance of energy. So all those things are very good for the Main Street. Lowering the price of eggs, lowering the price of goods, lowering the price of services, lowering the price of raw materials and electricity and energy, that is very good for Main Street. And so are most of these tariffs, again, not necessarily in the long run, but reanalyzing, redistributing the kind of way the world economy worked and bringing much of it closer to home, like we said, enabled by technology, enabled by robotics, and we will get back to that later in this episode, is really something that's benefiting Main Street. And over these past week or two, we saw Wall Street collapse completely, specifically in as a result of Trump's tariff notices, and then Wall Street bounced back pretty quickly once he froze those for 90 days to negotiate with the 75 plus countries that came in, kissed his ass and are waiting in line to negotiate. So what we're seeing right now is a bifurcation where the focus is on Main Street, and when Main Street economy booms, Wall Street economy will definitely boom, as opposed to focus on Wall Street. So a lot of pain in the short term, a lot of gain in the long term. A lot of people are trying to say, oh, Trump is dirty, him and his family. He's probably investing in all these stocks. He's probably shorting the market. He's probably buying the market, insider trading. To that, I say, where's the evidence? We've seen generations of politicians, both on the right and the left, more notably the left, but also on the right as well, who have been doing insider trading for decades, literally, to an extent where they've turned themselves into memes because they're so good at picking stocks, and where there are entire kind of groups of Wall Street investors that will follow their investments because of their insider trades. So I doubt Trump as an outsider really that's what he's here to do. Like, I don't think he came to the presidency in order to do some insider trading. If so, he would have become a politician 50 years ago, right? He was successful in business. Running for politics doesn't necessarily benefit your businesses. I assume it will over the decades, but I don't think he's doing insider trading. Maybe some of his children or relatives or other people possibly that that's not out of the picture. But what we do know for a fact is that congressmen and representatives have been doing it for decades, and it seems like what Trump is trying to do is fix Main Street at the moment, even at a huge cost to Wall Street, which many of his billionaire friends may not like. What do you think?
Yeah, so the markets don't like instability. So any sort of big question mark as where things are going to move or change to
Mhm.
causes the stock market to act erratically, which we saw. Not a surprise, nothing new. It is the way it is. However, I agree. I mean, listen, you can't govern a country with the fear of how the market's going to react. You have to do the right thing. You have to take note. You're not going to do things haphazardly. Trump has been accused of being reckless in how he did this. I haven't seen that at all. I think he's doing what he needs to do, and he's using the leverage that he has with all these countries. We have dozens of countries that have come forward to ask to negotiate with the United States to provide a more level playing field for global trade. And that's, I think in the end going to benefit the entire world, not just the United States. It's going to allow for some of the barriers that currently exist to be reduced or maybe be eliminated. So I think that your point is well taken that, ultimately there is a divide between how the stock market reacts and how people, you know, personal bank accounts and the cost of going to the grocery store is impacted by some of the things that are being done by the government. Ultimately, the things that Trump is trying to rectify are the problems that everyone's been complaining about. A large part of how Trump got in this time had to do with the fact that everybody was at wit's end with inflation and the cost of everything, and people couldn't afford to live and pay for basic necessities anymore, and something had to change. And if that change causes some short-term pain, as Trump says, and I'm not using his speaking points, I'm just saying the obvious. I mean, clearly, if that's what it takes, you have to rip the band-aid off, have that pain to do the right thing. Of course,
Mhm.
scholars can debate what the right thing is, but there's this piece that basically, we have Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, speaking and talking a little bit to that, and that's in the same, in the same realm of what we're discussing. There is a divide, and what's the best way to go? Do you cater just to the stock market? Do you want to make sure that that's all that matters? Or do you try to do the right thing, even if there's, negative short-term impacts to the market?
Yeah, and Scott is regarded as one of the most brilliant economic minds in the world, specifically macroeconomic minds. Even before he joined the administration, he's considered kind of one of the most brilliant investors of all time. So definitely worth listening to what he has to say.
Conveying my best wishes of President Trump. He understands that national strength comes from the ground up, not the top down. And this concept applies to good government just as much as it does to banking and capital formation. For too long, financial policy has served large financial institutions at the expense of smaller ones. No more. No more. This administration aims to give all banks the chance to succeed, whether it's JP Morgan or your local mortgage and loan. It aims to get capital to Americans who need it by getting bureaucracy out of the way. For the last 4 decades, basically since I began my career in Wall Street has grown wealthier than ever before, and it can continue to grow and do well. But for the next 4 years, the Trump agenda is focused on Main Street. It's Main Street's turn. It's Main Street's turn to hire workers. It's Main Street's turn to drive investment. And it's Main Street's turn to restore the American dream. And who's going to lead this revival? The men and women in this room. As community and small bankers, you know the needs of small town America and your community.
Yeah, so this is very interesting. Specifically where he was giving the note, right? And we kind of heard a little bit of that at the end. He was talking at the Americans Bankers Administration or Association or something, right? So he's going basically to Wall Street and punching them right in the face, and that is kind of refreshing, to be honest. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, he's making the point. I mean, listen, he's trying to help the American Bankers Association, the attendees understand that there are decisions that have to be made, as we were discussing, that may not always benefit those constituents or the actual, investing institutions and banks in the short term. But as you pointed out earlier, if you take care of the people, of providing a means for people to thrive, in the end, everyone will benefit. The markets will benefit. That's
Exactly.
that's the truth. And I think sometimes it's having the courage to point out the obvious. It's not about hiding in the corner and not allowing the markets to take a hit, um, and therefore not doing the right thing. You want to do the right thing and then come out in front of it and explain exactly what's going on. And I think he's
And the
pointing very
results will
clearly.
come.
Sorry?
The results will come.
Yes, and he's pointing out very clearly that, there's a method to the madness, so to speak. This isn't some willy-nilly sort of thing that's being done. This is to try to obviously right a wrong and right the ship that was taken on water for all these years. So I think that's a very
So,
important point, and I think the venue was a proper venue for him to be discussing this. I mean,
so I think the source of this problem is back during the financial crisis, 2009, 2010, 2011. What we saw is Obama declare that many banks and insurance companies and institutions were too large to fail, which means because so many Americans had their retirements in it, it would affect the Americans because they employed so many people. It would affect, the Wall Street, and it would affect, the economy if these banks would collapse. And therefore, even though they're failing, even though they're corrupt, even though there are probably lots of fraud, right? Like we saw with Wells Fargo and others, still they're too big to fail, right? So that just enables them. If a corporation knows that the government has their back no matter what, it just enables them to go crazy and do whatever they want. But there became this very large bifurcation where community banks, which for generations were the cornerstone of the US economy, right? You go to your community bank if you want to start a local business, if you want to get a local investment. Uh, they're kind of like what spurs a lot of the local business growth, is because they understand their communities, they understand their neighborhoods, they understand the people there, they can have a more personal relationship, etc. So for hundreds of years, local banks were where the real power was. And local pays were very competitive because there were hundreds and thousands of them competing against each other, which was very good for everyone because it meant that there was more money to go around. If one bank didn't want to invest in your business, you could just go to another competing bank to invest in your business. What happened after the Obama administration, during the Obama administration, and the too big to fail kind of mind frame, was big banks were too big to fail. Small banks were sure enough big were sure enough small enough to fail, right? So we always enabled the failure of the small banks, and they would get just gobbled up by the big banks, because what happens when a bank fails is that somebody else has to buy them because there are assets and they're customers that are definitely worth money. So what happened was we saw these large banks just grow and grow and grow and grow and grow because they're too big to fail, whereas the small banks were failing all the time because more regulation, more kind of restrictions, and the fact that the big banks can't go bankrupt but the small banks can. Who are you going to put your money with, right? So we saw this huge bifurcation where the amount of small banks in the United States has shrinking completely, has almost disappeared. And now we're basically left with five big banks. Kind of like, there used to be hundreds of defense companies, and now, we're left with five defense companies, like we discussed last episode. Um, right now, all we're left is with five banks, and Jamie Dimon is basically the most powerful person in the world, not because his bank is the most competitive, not because they're the most successful. Yes, he has made some very brilliant moves over the past few years, but more importantly, because they were too big to fail, and they were allowed to gobble up all the small banks that were allowed to fail. So just a lot of corruption.
yeah, I mean, I agree. And ultimately, that's it. Consolidation can stifle innovation and essentially doing the right thing. And, listen, this is nothing new. I mean, people have always looked upon what the banks and the investment firms are doing, and not always in the best light. Sometimes it looks like what they're doing is sleight of hand. If you understand how the banking system works and how they're able to borrow money they don't actually have. I want to play some for you, which you don't know that I have queued up, but this is from 1937 describing how banking works. I want to know if you think this still is an accurate representation. maybe before your time. This is the Three Stooges.
Oh, the Three Stooges. I love the Three Stooges.
And they're
When I was
showing kind of how sort of banking works. Okay, let's take a look, and you tell me if this still makes sense. It's even a little
sure,
before my time, but I know I'm old, but not this old. But this may still ring true. Are you ready?
sure.
Let's see what happens. And for those that are not watching but hearing, if you listen attentively, you'll understand that there's three of them, and they're basically the money's changing hands, and it's going in one big circle round and round as they're paying off each other's debt. Here we go.
$20 you owe me. Oh, yeah? Well, I only got 10, so here's 10, I owe you 10. Thanks. Hey, Mo, you owe me 20. Well, here's 10, I'll owe you 10. You owe me 20. Here's 10, I owe you 10. Here's the 10 I owe you. Here's the 10 I owe you. Here's the 10 I owe you. Good, now we're all even.
Yeah. It is one of the marvels of the way the economy works. And it is what allows capitalism, right? So this funny, stupid thing, right, is what basically enables the pie to grow, right? And even that is kind of powered by inflation and by what you mentioned earlier, banks borrowing money from invisible hand, basically the hand of God, right? Is kind of the way behind the scenes it works. But yeah, so there are benefits to that, but it is also kind of a little bit of a mind fuck, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the challenge with this, and that's why when people are screaming because these institutions can take a hit when the government's trying to do the right thing for its people. It's yeah, I hear you, but you got to do the right thing, and it's refreshing when a government does that. Doesn't matter which party it is or whatever. You sometimes have to do the right thing and move forward, and not just keep the status quo and be scared that there'll be some feathers ruffled. As long as there's a proper methodology and game plan, that's the way things need to go. Now, there's a lot of critics. Of course, we're still going to say that the U.S. and its woes and all the problems that we've discussed in other episodes, issues with trade, global trade, certainly with China in large part, that, the United States, a lot of this has to do, again, with allowing, poor U.S. policy to take hold. There's, Jack Ma, who's, not an inexperienced person, who's exceedingly successful. He was at the World Economic Forum, basically, deflecting, U.S. ongoing. This is not something, that we're just now, but the U.S. has always complained about trade with China, and given China's massive stature, how it impacts the United States. And this is, there's a clip we have where he's pushing back and blaming the United States for its policy, and how policy and misspending essentially and inadequate reinvestment within the country is what led to this. And I think that's a good sort of next sort of point to jump to be able to really understand, what is it that we're talking about? Why are we in the predicament that we're in now? Where should we go next? And are the things that are being done, do they make sense, or is this one big mistake? I mean, that's really the question. So let's listen in on this.
That the Americans said, we just want to control the IP, we just want technology, we just want the brand, and leave the lower end jobs for the world. Great strategy. Past 30 years, IBM, Cisco, Microsoft, they made tons of money. The profit they made are much more than the 4 largest banks in China. But where'd the money go? Past 30 years, the American had 13 wars, spending $14.2 trillion. The money going there. What if they spend a part of that money on building up the infrastructure, helping the white collars and blue collars? No matter how strategy good it is, you're supposed to spend money on your own people. And the other money, which I'm curious about, is that when I was young, I heard America is bad. Ford and Boeing, those big manufacturing companies. The last 10, 20 years, I heard about is Silicon Valley and Wall Street. The money go to the Wall Street. And what happened? Year 2008. The financial crisis wiped out $19.2 trillion USA alone. They wiped out all the white collars and destroyed 34 million jobs globally. So what if the money is not Wall Street? What if the money spent on the Middle East, Middle West of the United States, developing the industry there? That could be changed a lot. So it's not the other countries steal jobs from you guys. It is your strategy.
Yeah, so this is an interesting video. Just a little bit of a background for anybody who isn't familiar. Jack Ma was the founder of Alibaba. He went to probably like Stanford. So he studied in the US and kind of, like we mentioned in previous episodes, instead of building the company here, he went back to China and he built the company there. The Alibaba is extremely successful. Jack Ma, however, a little less so. So for anybody who isn't familiar, probably like 4 or 5 years ago, he spoke at an event, I think it was for Chinese bankers, and he criticized one of the rules of the CCP to do with kind of lending and investments, I think. And basically, since then, he was disappeared of. The Chinese Communist Party just completely just kidnapped him and made him disappear. And for months and months, there were like hesitations. Where is he? Maybe he died. Maybe something happened. And eventually, I think the CCP kind of released some video of him kind of just to prove that he's alive, but he is no longer leading Alibaba. I don't know who is the official CEO, but we do know that it is definitely the CCP who is controlling Alibaba and most of the other Chinese companies. He's a smart guy. Like, he is very knowledgeable, like we saw in this clip. He is also kind of a little like misinformed and clueless about different subjects. There's a very fascinating interview between him and Elon Musk, and you could just see like heaven and earth, the difference between the two of them. He just says all these like remarkably like absurd statements that just kind of make no sense. But on this clip, he was kind of spot on. Obviously, we don't necessarily agree that China wasn't taking U.S. jobs. That is true too. But we can definitely agree that, spending trillions on, wars in the Middle East, especially when you're funding both sides of the wars, right? Like that funny meme of the rockets going out of Gaza and the Iron Dome interceptors going out of Israel to intercept the rockets. And it says, my tax dollars at work, somehow also my tax dollars at work, right? So it's understandable that the U.S. is funding, the Iron Dome, missile protection system. Why is U.S. aid and the State Department also helping, fund Hamas and Gaza and stuff like that, right? So the absurdity, right? It's like we built up the Afghani military lying to everybody that it's super strong and it will stand on its own, when everybody knew that it would just collapse the minute the U.S. left. But instead of leaving a small contingent in the Air Force base and, kind of just a few advisors just to keep things standing for a little while, we basically just left millions of dollars of equipment up to the Taliban, right? So it's not that we were just fighting wars with no point, notably the Iraq war, but it's also kind of like the results of those wars, right? We end up just shooting ourselves in both feet, no matter how we try and go about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And ultimately it's interesting. And that back and forth that you mentioned with Elon Musk and Jack Ma, I heard it. Yeah, there was a tremendous divide in their understanding of things. I think Elon by far seemed to
specifically technology and AI and how that will affect the future. Like Jack Ma, we were like, how are you the head of one of the largest, most innovative companies in the world, changing the world? And in China, it could be that he was ahead because he was more loyal to Xi and to Xi's faction within the CCP, as opposed to other competing factions, as opposed to pure brilliance. Obviously, he started off as pure brilliance as a startup, but as it grew and became an influential company, it seems like possibly he was just, the company was made successful by the CCP, not necessarily purely based on Jack Ma and the engineers' kind of hard work and brilliance.
And it's unfortunate and kind of surprising, actually. There's a lot of innovation coming out of China. I mean, I can tell you
specifically drones.
Yeah, drones. I mean, DJI. I mean, they make the best drones, arguably. And
not arguably, there's literally nobody competing aside from military drones.
Yeah, not on the same scale and the same quality, and again, tremendous innovation, new things coming out all the time. So again, it's not knocking the ability of China to innovate and advance new products and so forth. It's just that, yeah, in that particular debate that you referenced, yeah, Elon definitely showed a much better understanding, and it is interesting. It's important to listen to what Jack Ma was saying here, but
Hmm.
even though we don't agree with all of it, we would agree in part, I would imagine, like you were saying, that some of the U.S. policy has not helped, get us to where we need to be. And that's why certain things are needing to be reset and readjusted at this point. And there might be some pain through that. And I think that the status quo, the normal political infrastructure doesn't like that. It doesn't matter Republican or Democrat. They just don't like having the rug pulled out from under their feet from the normal way of things being done. In fact, just reported recently, we have Adam Schiff trying to open an inquiry against Trump for doing the things that he's doing and the administration.
Yeah, let's take a look at that one.
Yeah, I think we could. Yeah, I have that clip as well. Let me see.
Well, I think Congress should do an investigation into this, but we're going to demand
Oh
answers.
my goodness. Frankie, is this the latest collusion hoax? It was Russia collusion hoax. Now it's President Trump negotiating on the world stage, advocating for America, getting ripped off, and because he's using leverage and doing an art of the deal, therefore they're going to impeach him because the market went down, because he's putting Main Street over Wall Street because the market went down, and then he got some leverage, so the market went back up. That therefore means that an investigation needs to be opened into him. Are you kidding me right now? Frankie, what's going on
Listen,
here?
all I'm going to say is, I mean, are you really surprised, Mike? I'm actually, I would call this because we got Dan Bongino in there. Obviously, he goes straight in. Shift is coming up. We're going straight after him. We got Cash doing his thing. I mean, none of it's coming out yet, but this guy.
Coming for him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this guy is just.
We're coming for
He's
him.
taking that ammunition, putting it in his backpack so he could say, look, they're investigating me because I think they're insider trading.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a little ironic that one of the people who's been doing insider trading for so many years is like, help, they're taking away my money. And it's like, the money you were stealing? It's like, well, my money. Like, well, the money you were stealing, right? So obviously this isn't necessarily directly going after him in terms of his insider trading, but this is kind of just really going in depth on that whole, Wall Street versus Main Street. And the minute Wall Street is down, it affects, Mr. Schiff's investments, and he is very worried about it. And he wasn't that worried when he was stealing money and doing insider trading for the last few decades, allegedly.
Allegedly. Well, and if not, certainly the bottom line is it's not. He's just emblematic of the idea that politicians will get upset if things are being done differently, because in the past, forever, it benefits the politicians that have been there forever. So if something is
Exactly.
changing and it could potentially hurt, kind of their way of seeing things. But we're at a point where things have to change. Ultimately, there are enough people who aren't happy, but just like the protests that we see, a lot of them just, they're 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 kind of, there's a small number of people that I think are really out there just freaking out. The majority of people have questions. They may be a little nervous. They may be a little bit concerned because they're unsure. This may seem like uncharted waters. People hear them, again, the legacy media explaining things in such a way that's designed to create fear and get people upset. But at the end of the day, prices are coming down. There's a genuine desire to right some of the wrongs that we've had in our country as far as trade. And this is our one opportunity to finally do that, to give us a better future. And, we should all be hoping that it all works out okay. We should all be hoping that, this is done in a manner that we all benefit, and it might potentially benefit the world, not just the United States. But yet we still have the media going out there and trying very hard to give this impression of some really horrible thing going on. People protesting still, as we've discussed in prior episodes, Elon Musk and Doge and Trump. But if you look at some of these protests, aside from them being clearly funded and people being paid and scripted as to what to say and what to chant, some of what's, if you just get a clip on the news, you think, oh, look at all these people protesting. But if you go and take a look at what's actually going on, it really changes. We have a clip of one of these protests, which just, I mean, again, we're not saying they're all exactly like this, but this is enough to make anyone say, like, really, this is what we have out there protesting against this.
So what we know for a fact is that if your grandma loses her social security, it may take her a few days to call, to notice, right? Maybe sometimes a few months, and then to call, and then to try and get help before she ever makes a Facebook post and complains about it. But who's the first person to complain the minute their social security check stops arriving? The scammer, right? So the scammers are the first ones to call. They're the first ones. Like we heard, like 40% of all calls to Social Security were scammers, right? So anytime there's a problem, they're the first ones to complain. So like when they started discussing, halting funding to USAID, that, all these sudden, protests, who were those people protesting? There were the USAID employees, which were probably paid very kind of, way overpaid, let's just say, and all these other Democratic elites who probably had family members working for some of these NGOs, giving out funds like we saw in the last episode, taking a $700,000 salary for running a food kitchen, right? For helping to feed the poor. And it's not like she was feeding, 12 million people. So yeah, a lot of it, the first people to complain are the scammers, are the thieves, are the bad actors, right? So anytime you see something like that, always recognize who are the first people to make a fuss about it, because they are possibly and probably guilty.
Absolutely. And then you look at protests like this. Let's watch this as an example.
They are confronting these anti-Trump and anti-Elon Musk protesters, seeing what they're protesting for. Let's see who we can get up here. Wow.
I just want to remind you of protest procedure. Don't film unless it's consent of anyone's faces. And we'd ask if
We're on public property, though, so we can film.
Are you part of the protest? Are you
Of course, I'm here. Hey, easy, dude. You don't have our consent to do this.
Don't touch me.
Don't
touch me!
Whoa,
Don't
easy.
touch me!
I didn't touch you for nothing.
You touched me! Don't touch me!
You want some money? He's touching
Can we
him.
get someone around these people, please?
Walk around them, circle
Elbows!
Easy, easy.
Elbows!
Easy,
Elbows!
easy.
No.
Easy.
You're not here to.
Wait.
You're not here for the protest.
Whoa.
Police!
What? Get the police. What did I do?
Don't feed the trolls!
No. Get 'em
Elbows
off.
around!
Elbows around. Holy cow. Don't let me go. Ooh, what are you going to do?
Elbows!
Elbows. Man, we are peaceful. What the hell is going on out here? Watch. He can't keep running.
Yeah, so for anybody who wasn't watching, the video starts off with a big red flag that says Elon, and inside there's a swastika. Inside of the O, there's a swastika. And right next to it, there are a few upside down American flags and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, like, God's Sad. Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's a brilliant writer. He's one of the most successful professors in Canada. He's kind of like a Jordan Peterson, but not in terms of psychology. In terms of like, he studies both biology, so like parasites, and psychology, and then he has these brilliant takes on, like, the parasitic mind and how people get anesthetized. Basically, they get infected with the woke mind virus, and it really just blocks their brains completely. And it's funny because they're like, elbows, and you can't film, and you don't touch me, you touch me, right? And it's like, but then he goes and he shoves his hand right in the cameraman's face, and it's like, it's kind of like the whole elbows is like, they, instead of clapping, we should flick our fingers because somehow clapping is offensive to somebody, or who knows what, right? So it's like, at some point, people just go off the very deep end. And it's funny because based on our conversations, you may think that we're like crazy Trump fans and who knows what, but we're actually like typical liberals from 20, 30 years ago, right? Like old school liberals. And just try to keep our heads screwed on straight, which is something that is much less common, especially on the left side of the aisle, which is what makes us seem like, right wingers is just because the left has gone just so far off the deep end, like we kind of saw in this video. And obviously, it's not everybody. Probably the vast majority of the left are kind of like we saw in the last episode of The Father, just people who consume, legacy media and are under false impressions. But in reality, the vast majority of the world has been waking up to the fact that the left has just gone off the deep end, and it's kind of what we see in this clip.
Yeah, I think that the truth is the reason Trump got in is because there was enough of the Democratic left that actually voted for Trump because Trump is more like what they associated with, what we associate with. I mean, it's not because these people were all Republican or all completely conservative.
Nazis, you forgot Nazis.
Right. Well, we're not all Nazis, right? And ultimately, as you brought up in the past, I mean, Trump was, liberal before. I mean, he still is. Many of these policies aren't. In fact, today's Republican Party is much more aligned with what the Democratic Party used to be. So I think, the reality is, if you take the labels off of everybody and the parties and everything else, most people, I think, in this country are looking for basically the same thing. Common sense. Most people are quite liberal when it comes to most things. People do want some basic controls. People want, clean water and clean air and all this other stuff, but they don't want so much regulation that you can't open or run a business. They want trade with other countries. They want to avoid, discrimination, but they want to allow free speech. I think most people are somewhere towards the middle, and all that these politicians and certainly the media can do is try to make it seem like people are on one side or the other and so far detached. And, look, I think that unfortunately the politicians fall victim to what they believe. And I think that's what happened with the Kamala Harris campaign, was that they believed that they would resonate with people that would be so far left and they would somehow win. And the problem is that was not the case. That most people
They're
thought that
catering
was
to the
just
extreme.
right. Most people just aren't like that. And most people aren't ultra right either. Most people are somewhere in the middle with a few topics or things here or there that may lean more one way or the other. That I think people are tired of not being able to have discussions. Again, there's a 1% fringe, 2%, whatever it is, that the people just go screaming or wind up at those protests like that one, which was quite, I think if they're trying to avoid a totalitarian regime, then why they should look in the mirror, because they're trying to control the movement of someone going there just to report on the thing and ask questions and surrounding him. And it just, I mean, I could think of some communist countries where they would act the same way to prevent any kind of reporter or speech. But interestingly, I mean, it almost like it lends itself to comedy, to humor. One of my favorites, I mean, there's not that many politicians I really like. Most of them I really have no interest in even listening to. But John Kennedy is one of them, which I think you like as well. He's always
Yeah.
got something amusing to say, whether you agree with him or not.
And his accent is awesome.
It is. And he just has this incredible way of looking at things. And I think the sad reality is, whether it's completely true or not, when you look at the Democrat Party today, a lot of people will look at that type of protest and think that's a Democrat Party right now, because it's just gotten so far off the rails. The people are pushing things that are just not what the majority of American people really want. And he made that comment recently. I'll put this up. I mean, again, humor. People need to take it for that, because that's what it is. But whether that's your feeling and you agree with him, the bottom line is that's the sort of sentiment a lot of people now have, even if, registered Democrats are kind of tired of how the party is being portrayed because of its own actions, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
So I think if you look at the way historically the Republicans were the party of censorship, right? Like anything that was on TV that was like a boy and a girl kissing, it's like, oh my God, we can't have that, right? And it's like, oh, they show tits, oh my God, right? And all these like, family values and, TV and mainstream media has to be monitored and censored, and how dare they say such a thing, right? Which was like typically a Republican point of view. So historically, I considered myself, mostly libertarian, although not associated with the Libertarian Party because Jill Stein basically supports Hamas, and she talk about people who went off the deep end. But kind of like, and somehow like libertarian just meant just avoiding, just not caring about what happens in the world at all, which the U.S. being the leader of the free world just doesn't kind of make sense. But historically, I would tell people that I'm, socially liberal, right? I don't care what you do in your bedroom. You do you, basically, as long as you're not bothering anybody else. You're free to do whatever you want, even if that includes chopping off your tits, right? Like, I don't care. You do you. And then, fiscally conservative. When it comes to money, we have to be, transparent and reliable, and stop the waste and stop the fraud, and, efficiency, right? Efficiency is core. So I think that's the way most people were, right? I mean, Elon Musk was a Democrat his entire life, and now he's considered a right-wing Nazi somehow, right? But what we've been seeing is that the Republican Party has shifted to being socially liberal, right? The Republican Party is now the party that says, I don't care what you do in your bedroom, and gay is fine, right? Even though 30 years ago they were, against being gay. Nowadays, the vast majority of Republicans are like, I don't care if you're gay, as long as you don't groom children to be, and to be influenced by pedophiles and do really creepy stuff, right? So the mainstream Republican Party has basically adopted that idea of, physically conservative, socially liberal, basically libertarian in most aspects, whereas, like we said, the left wing has just kind of gone off the deep end. But yeah, let's watch this with Mr. Kennedy.
Yep. So this is Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana on Fox with Sean Hannity. It's very brief, but I think quite amusing as to how we often people think about the Democratic Party today.
I consider Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez to be the leader of the Democratic Party. I think she's the reason there are directions on a shampoo bottle. Our plan for dealing with her is called Operation Let Her Speak.
Yeah, and Operation Let Her Speak is exactly what we did with Kamala, right? Every time she spoke, she went down in the polls. And every time the legacy media tried to tell us how amazing she were, sometimes that affected the polls a little bit until she opened her mouth again. Yeah, the jokes about Ocasio-Cortez are kind of spot on. She, I guess, still has the mentality of a bartender, and is kind of radical in a lot of her views. But yeah, I found this very entertaining.
And what's sad is if any of these individuals, including AOC, if they just simply took a step back and listened and understood that most people aren't far right or far left. They're just, like everyone else. They just want to live their lives and be able to be successful, and they want to live in a great country. They don't want to hate their country. To keep incessantly telling people how horrible the United States is. Well, if you're an elected official, maybe you're to blame, So, but interestingly, I don't think that's the way most people view the country right now. And I think even with regards to the current administration, most people, admittedly, are somewhat happy. And although they may not necessarily agree with everything or may not understand everything, the reality is, it's being widely reported that, guess what? People on both sides of the aisle, despite the political rhetoric, the people that are, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, what have you, I mean, it doesn't matter. Across the board, for the most part, if people are really being honest about it, they're kind of okay with what's going on and are hopeful. I mean, and that's what you want to be, is hopeful that what's being done is a path forward for the country, for us to be better than we've been for the last few years, which everybody really hasn't been happy with. And, all news organizations have been reporting this in one way or another, including, some of the legacy media that perhaps has not been the most favorable to Trump. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think where the senator definitely gets it right, though, is in terms of AOC representing the Democratic Party. And that's the crazy part, is even after the catastrophic failure that the Democratic Party had in the past election, any way you try and look at it, it was a catastrophe. Instead of them saying, hey, let's kind of pander more and refocus on the 80% of Americans that agree about 80% of stuff, and let's go back to the middle, they're basically just going more extreme. Like you hear, there was a podcast with all the Kamala's advisors for the election, and they're just talking about how all of America are Nazis and how it's all Trump's fault that he won, and anything the bad that happened to Kamala is not because Kamala was just an utter turd. It's because Trump, right? I mean, that's one thing, but even now we're seeing basically who's left of the Democratic Party, aside from Mr. Schiff we saw earlier, is AOC and Bernie Sanders, which are the two most radical, most extreme kind of left-wing extremists on the on the Democratic Party side. They're the ones holding rallies and trying to kind of rally up the troops. They're basically all the Democratic Party has left, because the Democratic Party, at least until now, has failed to turn their focus back to the center, and instead has just gone more to the extreme, right? So the extremes, they're very demanding, specifically the extreme left, because they'll cancel you for everything, right? So that's why we saw most of the kind of Democratic senators pander to the extreme left, is because they were afraid of them. They may be 1% or 5%, but they were extremely vocal. And back in the day when they canceled people, it was kind of effective. Nowadays, it basically lost all of its sting. But yet still the Democratic Party has not woken up, and they are still focused on, pandering to the extreme left, which is why we see AOC and Bernie Sanders having these events now.
Yeah, and so the de facto leaders of the Democrat Party are no longer just Democrats, they're Democratic socialists.
Exactly.
Socialists. So that's just
straight up communists, basically, right?
Right.
Bernie was like a borderline.
So I'm just saying it's not a surprise, right? So let's see what CNN is reporting, right? CNN is not the bastion of MAGA or what have you, right? Let's see what they have to say.
I think there was this concern among some folks that Donald Trump would come in for a second term and kind of be a lame duck. He ain't no lame duck. If anything, he's a soaring eagle. What am I talking about here? Let's talk about Trump executive orders in 2025. He's already signed 111 so far. That is the most at this point in a presidency in at least 100 years. In fact, it's the most in any single year, and we're only in April, since Harry S. Truman in the early 1950s. The bottom line is, whether you like Trump or you don't like him, you can't say that he's come in and not try to deliver on what he at least believes was his promises on the campaign trail, and he's doing so in historic fashion.
How are people reacting to and feel about Trump's approach?
Yeah, okay. So Trump's approach here, what are we talking about? Trump's approach to presidential power. I think the American people recognize what he's doing here is completely different. We're talking, get this, 86% of the American public believes that Trump's approach to presidential power is completely different from past presidents, compared to only 14% who believe it is in line with precedent. And we're talking about at least 79% of Democrats, independents, and Republicans. So again, you can agree or you can disagree with Donald Trump, but what you can't disagree with is that he's doing things very differently. I have used the Frank Sinatra quote before. He is doing it, quote unquote, my way, and that is what Donald Trump has done throughout both of his presidential terms, and he's certainly doing that, Kate Baldwin, in term number 2.
So, completely differently, clearly they agree, but is it, take it a step further, do the people think he has too much, he's taken too much power?
Yeah, this I think is the real question, right? You can believe that he's doing stuff completely differently, but do you think that he has a little too much power or not? And this is interesting. So Trump's presidential power is too much, the right amount, too little. Well, 47% say too much, but then you get 36% who say the right amount, then you get 17% who say too little, so you're essentially dealing with a majority of the American public, 53%, who do not say that Trump has too much power. They either says he has too little power or the right amount of power. So the idea, that argument that Donald Trump is quote unquote a king, that I don't think holds with the American people. It does hold maybe with 47%, but with the majority of folks, they believe Donald Trump's doing something completely differently, and they don't believe he has too much power, and the executive orders he signed certainly suggest he's no lame duck. He is, as I said at the beginning, a soaring eagle.
I mean, that's just a quote for the history book, straight out of CNN's mouth. I think this pollster is kind of level-headed, and he's been interesting to watch on the CNN side. But what we saw with Trump's first administration was, obviously, he was immediately accused of Russiagate, and the FBI started investigating him, and basically everybody was betraying him. And he even though he made promises to clean the swamp and to fight corruption and to kind of, bring America back, he was too distracted to do it because, all of the false investigations and, false claims against him, one after another, that almost all turned out to be completely false, which is one of the reasons why he won in 2024. But also because he just wasn't prepared. Like, he came from business, so he wasn't a dirty politician, but he didn't know to choose the right people. And therefore, he ended up choosing a lot of people he regretted on, and that's why it looked like the White House was in a mess, because he cared about loyalty, and it seemed like people were not loyal to him, and they weren't just not loyal to him, they were actively fighting against him, right? Like we saw with James Clapper, whatever it was, the head of the FBI, he was literally just fighting against him and creating an investigation so that he can't discuss things, that he can't be fired, which is very similar actually to what we're seeing right now in Israel with Ronen Bar, who's the head of the Shabak, which is basically the Israeli FBI, doing the exact same thing, creating an investigation into Bibi about Qatar, and then therefore saying that he can't be fired, right? So Bibi announced that he wants to fire this guy, and this guy's like, no, you can't fire him because I'm investigating you now, and that's a conflict of interest, which he literally pulled straight out of the books of the the American FBI and the American deep state. The deep state runs deep in many countries, not just in the United States. So last time Trump promised to fight against it, but failed because A, he was distracted, and B, he nominated a few or a lot of wrong people to many positions. This time around, though, he came way more prepared. He didn't just have 4 years to prepare; he had 8 years to prepare. And well, really, it's just the 4 Biden years, but it was his first 4 years of really learning on the job, right? So he had 4 years of on-the-job training, which is the best way to learn, and then 4 more years of watching the disasters of the Biden administration before he came in this time. And this time he came prepared, and basically the administration is like rock solid. The vast majority of the cabinets, of the secretaries, are just solid choices. The one person I really don't like is Steve Witkoff, which, aside from being way too distracted, he's both the special envoy to the Middle East, but he's also dealing with the Ukraine-Russia war. I don't know why he's focused on 2 different environments completely. Also, he's just very filled with the kind of old school narrative. He sounds very much like a Biden person. He basically just trusts Qatar completely and thinks that they're a phenomenal actor, and he loves the Turks, even though they're both of them support the Muslim Brotherhood very strongly. And he recently, we just saw, is that he's been saying that he wants to get back to an Iran deal that is basically identical to the JCPOA, which is the one that Obama signed and that Trump left. So he's the one kind of question mark. And even in the negotiations with Hamas, it seems like all he cares about is freeing the hostages and not destroying Hamas. That is not his priority. He even mentioned that he's willing to give them a place in any future kind of ruling of the Gaza Strip. So basically all the conceptions that caused the war in the Middle East, he doesn't seem to understand, and he basically is just wanting to repeat them all. And also his negotiations in Ukraine and Russia, it just doesn't seem like he's doing a very good job. So aside from Steve Witkoff, though, everybody else is super solid.
Yeah, and like anything else, I mean, time will tell, right? And that's what everyone is doing, is watching, listening. And I think rather than just, screaming bloody murder because perhaps the people who are there are not the ones that some of these individuals voted for, let's see what the results are. And that's really, I think, what we should always hope for. Even for, individuals that didn't vote for Obama. They weren't out in the streets protesting and screaming and so forth. I think it's just like that. I mean, ultimately, I think there's a lot of different facets to how we view our government, right? So we're talking about one facet of it. One of my other favorite ones has to do with the state of our healthcare system, the state of, health in the United States, and how we've become a rather sick population. And, it's nice to see this government finally, for the first time probably ever, really putting a true effort into addressing concerns about all the diseases and illnesses that we're having that we didn't have 50, 100 years ago. What's causing it? And kind of ironically or amusingly, despite the angst and screaming everyone has, guess what? The person that's leading that charge under this administration is not just a Democrat, but it's someone whose family has an incredible legacy in the Democrat Party. So obviously RFK Jr., and, he is the only, as I've said before, politician on either side of the aisle that has ever consistently and repeatedly come out and said, look, we need to get to the bottom of what some of these problems are. Why is there so much autism, Alzheimer's, heart disease, cancer? What is going on? Because we didn't have all these problems. Once upon a time, these problems didn't exist, or they were virtually unheard of. And, I think that's it's one of my favorite topics, right? To kind of say we need to all spend time looking at the state of our healthcare system, asking the right questions as individuals, as patients, as individuals who don't want to be patients, who want to stay healthy. What are the kinds of things we need to be concerned about? And some of it relates to just outright honesty or dishonesty within the medical system, within what the government allows. I mean, we're one of the few countries, one of only a couple of countries in the world, that allows drug companies to advertise on television and to the consumer. And that's pretty odd, isn't it?
Yeah, us in New Zealand, and kind of like you mentioned in the first episode, is that something that you like kind of watching closely, is kind of seeing the statistics and the ethics and the games that are played when it comes to drug advertisements. Who is it? I think it was a famous writer who said, there are lies, there are damn lies, and then there are statistics. So statistics are kind of like the basis of a lot of science, but also they're very easy to be played with, very, especially when it comes to medicine and stuff like that. And I think you have a few very good examples of how marketing companies will use statistics that are technically correct statistics. They're not lying, right? But they're going to use these statistics to skew things completely out of proportion and to show the efficacy of these drugs to be way higher than they actually are, when in reality they tend to be, negligible, if at all. And then obviously they barely mention the side effects, which are extremely common and cause many more problems, which then cause more medicines to solve, more medications to solve.
Yeah, and all of that is, I think, just again the tip of the iceberg, right? So you would think, as a regular consumer, if you saw an ad on television, let's say, or in print media or on social media for a medication, you would think that it would have to be completely honest and straightforward. But sometimes it's like watching a magic trick. You see the magic trick and you see the outcome, but there's something else going on behind the scenes. You may not understand what it is, but you know that what appears to be happening isn't the whole picture. And you'd hope that when it comes to your health and wellness, and even life and death, that you're not having to figure out what sleight of hand is being used. So as I mentioned in a prior episode, one of the things I do for amusement / educational purposes is to capture some of the information that's disclosed on some of these commercials. It has to be disclosed. I'm sure their attorneys require them to disclose it, but it flashes on a screen and they're hoping you don't either read it or understand it while there's other things going on that's quite distracting. I have a few examples I'll put up here just to basically touch on this topic. I think you can you see that now on the screen?
Yes.
So if you look at this, this is an ad for a medication called Repatha. If you look at it, what do you believe the benefit is to you by taking this medication?
Well, it'll reduce heart attacks by 27%. That's nearly 30%. 30% less of a chance of getting a heart attack. Holy crap, that's amazing.
Right. So if you've had a heart attack before, you don't want to have another one. And if you're told, listen, this medication might reduce your risk of another heart attack by up to 27% or by 27%, you think, you know what, that might be worth considering as one of the medications I'm taking, even if it has side effects, right? Because all medication have some side effects or some potential, sometimes pretty dangerous, untoward potential outcomes. But hey, that's a pretty good reason to consider it. Now, that's the main headline on the screen. If someone were looking at, just listening online, this has a cute little emoji looking heart that's coming up and distracting you. In bold, it says heart attack risk reduced by 27%. It's a very to the point message. But if you look at the bottom,
yeah, and they studied patients not treated with Repatha had more heart attacks, 4.6%, compared to those treated with Repatha, 3.4%. So the reduction between 4.6% to 3.4% is a reduction of 27%, which is why they're not technically lying. They're just using statistics. But they make it seem like your chance of getting a heart attack is 30% less, when in reality, your chance of getting a heart attack is 1.2% less, right?
Right. So this is something that's used over and over again in the pharmaceutical industry, in marketing. Again, I have a master's in business administration. If someone said to me, how could I spin this to make it sound better? That's how you do it. So what you do is you take the difference between the 4.6 and 3.4% on the two groups that were the ones that were treated with this medication and the ones that weren't, the difference of 1.2%. If you go and you divide that into the 4.6%, it's around 27%. So that's where they're getting the 27%. It's called relative risk. It's a relative number. But the true real world number is that in these studies, there was only 1.2% difference. And if I had a commercial that said, hey, take this medication, it's super great, and you're going to have, an 8.8% chance of maybe having a benefit, maybe you wouldn't want to take it because you still have all the side effects and everything else. So if it's less than 10% benefit, maybe you don't want to take it. So, and if it's a 1% difference between the two, it's probably not as great as you would think. If at the very least, you probably need to further explore the value of this medication versus the risk. And there's so many examples like this. I'm going to
I mean, it's basically negligible because 1.2% is within the what's it called, the proximity of error, the something of error. Basically,
right.
It's basically when you do kind of surveys or anything like that, there's an assumed basically a top end and a low end of where you could be wrong, and this is easily within what could be wrong, which means, how is this drug even approved in the first place? Because if you're doing clinical trials and the results are it's maybe better by 1%, but there are a whole bunch of side effects, including suicide and potential death, right? Then
not necessarily for that drug, but in general as a conversation,
general,
right? You have to look at all, and if you watch any commercials on these medications, the voice usually changes and they'll go on and on about all the potential, risks and side effects. Okay. And the issue is, you may be willing to bear that risk if you really think there's a substantial likelihood of benefit. There's things like number to treat and all this other stuff that you have to weigh in. But oftentimes, and even the physicians that you're going to, they're given, a brochure or pamphlet on these. I was at a doctor's office in a clinic in a large medical center with a patient. I was there accompanying the patient, and they had in the clinic a state-of-the-art office, beautiful, and it had a digital display on the wall that was scrolling through, and guess what it had? Drug ads on it, just like this, okay? With the disclaimers on the bottom, but unless you really look closely and long enough, because the screen will change, you don't catch what it says. Here's another one for a drug called Invenity. What does this one say?
Reduce spine fracture risk by 73%. 73% means 2/3 of a chance you're not going to get, a spine fracture. But then when you read the little letters, it says woman receiving Evenity had fewer new spine fractures, 0.5%, than woman receiving placebo, 1.8% at 12 months. So
what do you get out
and
of
this
that?
is new spine fractures, not not additional spine fractures or I don't know,
Okay,
worth developments and stuff like that. But even then, it's not 70%. I mean, technically, the reduction
it is, but it isn't,
1.8%
right?
is
The
0.5.
relative risk is 73%, but what you're really talking about is 1.8% minus 0.5% between the two groups, the placebo and the one with this medication. So it's a 1.3% difference out of 12. So they had to, after 12 months of taking this medication, they only saw 1.3% difference. That's it. So, but if you take the 1.3% divided by the 1.8%,
the difference between 1.8 to 0.5 is a reduction by 73%, more or less.
Right.
But
It's relative risk. It's not the absolute risk that you're seeing there. So again, this is another example of something where, if they really just simply put, look, there's a 1.3% difference between these two groups, and you should discuss this with your doctor, I'd be fine with that. The issue is that the bold statement of 73% is relative risk, and it may not be clear to, I would assume most people won't really grasp that it's a relative number. Another one here, this is a similar medication called Prolia. And what's the supposed benefit here?
It reduced spine fracture risk by 68%, and basically the same thing, 70%.
Right. So what does it say on the bottom? In a three-year
study, woman on Prolia had fewer new spine fractures, 2.3, versus woman on placebo, 7.2. So, yeah, I mean, this one is almost 5%, kind of slightly better.
4.9.
Yeah, 4.9. But even so, also, you should notice they specify new spine fractures. Okay, that's maybe understandable, but like we said, maybe that's a reason, right? Maybe when you take into account other types of spine fractures, it could even be worse. Who knows? But also the fact that, the first one was using 12 months, this is using 3-year studies. That is very interesting. Maybe within a 1-month time frame or a 6-month time frame, it's actually worse too. So, it's very finicky. Let's just say that.
Right. So again, it's like the magic trick, and it shouldn't be that way. And these are some of the things that are being debated. In fact, there's been some talk of, basically eliminating advertising of this type, because you would hope that the practitioner, the physician, the prescriber would completely understand the pros and cons of each medication or each treatment modality. And I would tell you that from my experience, most of them don't. They know this. They know the number that's in the big bold print that's been handed to them by the rep, and they don't have time to be researching and second guessing everything. In fact, I've heard numerous physicians speaking to the fact that when they were in training, the idea of relative risk versus absolute risk difference in these studies was never really clearly ingrained in them. And as they read studies, they're not really looking for this stuff. And again, it's not to bash these individual companies. This is being done on everything, okay? Ultimately, the importance is kind of buyer beware. You need to be aware that if you're going to buy a medication, which is what you're doing as a patient, where the consequences are, it's not like buying a piece of furniture where you can just return it if you're not happy. This is your own health, okay? And that sometimes the information you're being given, or that your doctors who are in good faith trying to help you, they're not being necessarily given an easy path to, getting the complete picture. And I think everyone should be entitled to get the complete picture. That's really the bottom line. And, there's, I think, a movement now. I mean, the Make America Healthy Again movement, which RFK Jr. again is pushing and leading and so forth, and I think is a great initiative. We'll see where it all goes, but I think it's desperately needed. Ultimately, it's not just about looking at issues with our food system, issues with drug manufacturing and the availability and so forth, but even things like this that we need to have truth in advertising. We need to make it not complicated. We need to have nobody second guessing what's being told to them and saying, well, they're not lying, it's legal, and there's a disclosure and a disclaimer at the bottom of the ad, and but it shouldn't be like that. It should be very simple. No one should need to have a PhD in marketing to understand what actually is being suggested to them, right? And there's a lot of people who are discouraged with the state of healthcare right now. There's a doctor named Sunil Dand. He's from the UK, practice in the US, and there's an interesting. He goes and posts regularly online his thoughts about just about everything, and most of which I agree with. And I think again, it's refreshing yet sad to see a physician who is bearing his soul and talking about how discouraged he is with the practice of medicine. And he posted a recent commentary on how he believes that doctors within, it's a bold statement, within 5 years, AI is going to make healthcare unrecognizable. I want to play a little tiny piece of that, but I would say, just for everyone's benefit, a lot of hospitals are using AI right now to double check and give a second or third opinion on radiology results and other diagnoses. And as it stands, a lot of AI can do a pretty good job on
better than the average doctor usually. Yeah.
Oftentimes. Now, again, I'm not advocating or suggesting people just use AI and circumvent using a licensed practitioner. That's not the idea. But it's interesting hearing from a physician saying that, look, the future is changing. And I think it's interesting to hear not just from our words, but from him. So that I'd like to put that up briefly, and we can move on to the next thing. I think we've had enough. We don't want to scare people. We just want to make sure people are aware that, we all are potential patients. We don't want to get sick. We don't want to be a patient, but we need to be aware that the information out there, both being presented to us and even to the practitioners that are there supposedly to help us, isn't always complete. It's not always giving us exactly everything.
And like we mentioned on previous episodes, the reason why the drug companies are doing all this advertisement isn't necessarily because they want you to see the drug and ask your doctor for it, which is something rare that only does happen in the US, but more because that buys them influence with the news agencies. Because how will you put an article about how damaging a drug is right next to an advertisement for that drug, or by the same company that manufactures that drug? The next day you're going to get a call from your rep saying, hey, do you like the money that 1.2 billion or whatever, however much it is we spend in advertising with your brand over the last 10 years? Is that something that you want to lose? Oh, I didn't think so. So why don't we go ahead and remove that article, right? So that's the reason why this marketing is happening. It isn't necessarily to advertise the drugs; it's to buy favorability with the media. And I think the American people are smarter than that. And over the past few years, they've noticed that the media is basically lying. Which this, in addition to so many other things, is why legacy media is now legacy. But the future of medicine is going to be personalized. It's going to be based on each individual person's DNA and kind of metabolism and life situations at any given moment. And the drugs will be kind of deployed directly to the needed area, the needed organ, as opposed to just kind of affecting the entire body. So medicine is about to change very quickly, like you said, thanks to AI, but not only. So let's go ahead and give a listen to this doctor.
Sure, here we go.
Hi everyone, Dr. Sunil Dand. In this video, I want to talk about what I believe will be a massive game changer for your health over the next 5 to 10 years, maybe even sooner. I'm talking about artificial intelligence, AI. This may mean different things to different people, but I'm going to explain to you in this video 5 ways that AI is going to completely upend your healthcare. And I believe a lot of this is very sorely needed. So I've written down some notes here, and I'm going to go over these points. Firstly, I would like to start with the fact that there are a lot of people out there, especially people within healthcare, who have a lot of fear with AI. In fact, this could apply to anything. And of course, AI could be used in bad ways, but I believe that there are a lot of good ways that AI is going to completely and utterly transform healthcare. And no profession
And that's enough to kind of get the gist of it. I mean, I would suggest anyone look up Sunil Dan, Dr. Sunil Dan, and see kind of what his position is on a lot of different, healthcare topics. But it's always interesting to see a physician who's coming forward and saying, look, we know there's problems. And, perhaps technology is going to be, for good or bad, technology is going to play a role in medicine in the future, be it he says 5 years, whether that's, really the time frame or not, but it is already being used by physicians themselves, but it will play a bigger and bigger role. And I think this is a wake-up call to the healthcare system and industries that, we need to provide correct, concise information for people to make up their minds and provide, solutions. This isn't about just giving medications endlessly. And, remember, there's an old saying in medicine that a cured patient is a lost customer. So, it's not that there's necessarily an inherent disincentive to cure, but if you think about it, hospitals aren't going out of business. They're just more and more and opening new state-of-the-art facilities and so forth. And if we were doing such a great job, we'd be putting hospitals out of business.
Less and less. Yeah.
Yes, and that's not happening. So it just goes to say that probably we need to do a better job, and hopefully in the years to come, with technology and with some, certainly here in the United States, with an effort from our federal government to motivate proper conduct and proper, straightforward conversations with the population to keep us healthy. We want to avoid being sick. Nobody wants to be sick. And as I've said in other episodes, if we were sick, battling cancer, battling any disease, all the other topics we talk about
don't matter anymore.
It wouldn't matter, right?
Yeah.
But technology is super important, and I think that that's one of the other topics we love talking about, and how technology is changing the world and how it will change in the years to come.
It's coming really quickly. So it's not just that technology is, improving and is changing things. It's that the pace of change is speeding up. And that's the crazy part, because even at technology's current pace, the rate of change is radical. So the human body has kind of evolved to extreme slow rates of change. Thousands of years is kind of the human body's evolutionary time frame. And then in recent decades, news and the world kind of changes around us at a faster rate. But it was like a few years for every meaningful change at least, right, to affect us. And to affect our psyches. And each one of these, like we said, kind of have these like downstream, effects. So like the invention of the telephone changed so many things, right? The railways changed so many things, and that kind of forced the invention of the clock, and everything became kind of time dependent. So time suddenly became an important thing, while historically it wasn't always in most places very considered. So it's not that change is happening; it's that the speed of the change is yeah. And nowadays, some of the most exciting research and development, really, in terms of AI, is self-driving cars, because that is one of the things that will actually change the physical world around us. There's a great YouTube channel called Now You Know, and they did, I think it was like a 10-part series about how self-driving cars will just change everything in the world around us. So like we mentioned a few episodes ago, technological progression was mostly in the physical world. And then over the past, few decades, that became basically just software. And it is great technology leaps. We all love our smartphones. But what we're going to see now is a lot of technological change in the physical world again. And this is also critical with the whole Trump bringing manufacturing back to the US, because in order to change the physical world around us, the infrastructure, stuff like that, we need the factories, we need the manufacturing capability here. But as that comes on shore, we're going to see kind of an extreme advancement of the world around us. So just by self-driving cars, suddenly it means that, the car can just drop you off and pick you up. So you no longer have to, look for parking, and parking lots don't even have to be there taking up the vast majority of space around every single building. Just kind of even that one small change, I think in that series they went into 10 different kind of categories of how self-driving cars will change everything that we think about just the world as we do. But even just that one that we focus, it's just the elimination of parking spaces, because if your car drops you off and then it goes to pick up other people, or it can go park out of town, no longer does every building in town have to have dedication to parking lots. Even that, it just changes everything, because suddenly you can rezone all of these parking lots in every single major city to be parks and to be green spaces and to be nature preserves and to be, additional buildings and neighborhoods and communities. And yeah, like 40% of most cities is parking lots. And that's just turf that heats up and isn't good for global warming or anything else. So yeah, just self-driving cars are really changing the world. The only company that's really on the forefront of this is Tesla, because like we mentioned in the previous episode, every other company is going down the LiDAR route of pre-mapping everything, and that is not very scalable. It's effective in small areas. It could be useful in certain communities. People use it in California and in Arizona at the moment, but that's not what's going to change the world. What's going to change the world is this kind of generalized solution where you teach a computer to understand the world. And that's really what Tesla has been doing. And that is expected to go live in Texas and maybe California in a month or two, and then expand to the rest of the world pretty quickly afterwards. So self-driving cars are here, and here's this video is just a little tiny taste of that. So let's give it a watch.
And this is at the factory, right?
Yeah, I think this is either this looks like the Texas factory, I think.
Right, here we go.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is just a whole bunch of completely empty cars driving. Again, the cars can't drive, can't self-drive on public roads yet, but they can self-drive on company property. So until now, Tesla had to employ hundreds of professional drivers whose job was to take the ready cars off the end of the production line and into the lots where where they're staged, and where they basically wait to be picked up and to be shipped around the world to customers. And here, that has all of those drivers have been, eliminated completely. And now the cars will drive themselves off the end of the production line and park themselves, kind of stage themselves, be ready to go for trucks to pick them up and deliver them to customers. And one of the cool parts is that another one of Elon's companies, called the Boring Company, just recently completed a tunnel that kind of goes under one of the main highways near the Texas factory. So that way, I think it's called the Cyber Tunnel, all of the new manufactured cars can go right through this tunnel. They drive themselves and right out the other end, kind of ready for customer delivery. So it's a taste of full self-driving. And you may say, yes, we've seen Waymo and we've seen, Cruise have self-driving cars in San Francisco, but that is very different. It's not a generalized solution. It's not very relevant for the world. It is useful for different communities, and they will expand to additional communities. And in those communities, there may be, some competition. Maybe it doesn't really make much sense because those cars cost close to $500,000 each. So it's very hard to make them, cost effectively or to do this profitably in any way, shape, or form, aside from the way Tesla has been doing it. But yeah, what we've been seeing now is, at the moment, it's really just mostly in the factories. Anybody who drives a Tesla and who paid for full self-driving will know that even though you need to monitor it on city streets, it is remarkably good at the moment, and it can basically tackle almost anything, even if it's not always super comfortable, but it's even getting good at that too. And it's now almost like chauffeur level comfort. So yeah, coming June to Texas and the rest of the world afterwards. But this is really going to change things, and people don't even notice.
And you've often referred to Tesla vehicles as being an AI on wheels, basically.
Yeah, robot on wheels. It's what it is, right? Because
And
a robot it takes inputs and it makes decisions, and then it acts upon them, and that's exactly what a Tesla car does, except instead of feet, it has wheels, but it's doing the same thing.
And one of the things you've brought up is basically that what makes the Tesla vehicles unique as opposed to all the other, autonomous or semi-autonomous vehicles out there is that it doesn't use, LiDAR and, several other ways of determining where it is. It doesn't require that an area that it's driving in be pre-mapped in a specific way. That these other vehicles are almost like a train on a set of tracks. They can go to
Exactly.
areas that have been thoroughly mapped out, whereas the Tesla products, they're using, inputs, AI essentially, to read the inputs from the cameras to try to understand the world around it. Do you think that's a fair way
Yeah,
of
just the
describing
way a human would. Exactly, yeah. So they kind of
it?
started with like 8 cameras, but it was single images. So you'd have these images flowing in, then the AI would kind of look at the images and try and understand them. And then they started sewing those images into like a surround picture, and that was kind of crazy. Then it went from coming pictures into a surround video, and yeah, now they're taking in so many other things into effect as well. And it really is just a robot that navigates the world at 80 miles an hour, which is very remarkable because humanoid robots only need to navigate at 5 miles an hour at the most, although they do need a whole lot more tactility with their fingers and kind of. So there is a lot of work to be done there. What's this video you have loaded from the BBC?
This is a surprise. This is Isaac Asimov, who is a famous science writer, probably one of the
Science fiction writer.
Science fiction writer, correct. He would write about the future and kind of what it entailed, but he would obviously research and try to understand what that was. This is him speaking in 1965 about the future of robotics. I thought you'd find it, if nothing else, and everyone else, hearing his words in light of where we are at today. I'm going to play this next. That this is really an interesting thing to see some of this coming to fruition. Here we go.
We will have our robot becoming less metal, more organic. At the same time, we will have human beings who will make more and more use of artificial organs of metal and plastic, artificial hearts, artificial kidneys, artificial lungs, replace bones by light metal substitutes. In short, we may have a society in which robots will drift away from total metal toward the organic, and human beings will drift away from the total organic toward the metal and plastic. And that somewhere in the middle, they may eventually meet. Now, when we have a kind of metal-organic hybrid creature, will it matter that he was originally metal and became metal-organic, or that he was originally organic and became metal-organic? Or will it not matter? Will we then have formed a kind of mixed culture, which perhaps might be higher, more efficient, better than either culture separately, if I can call the robot system a culture?
Yeah, so this is fascinating. For anybody who isn't familiar, Isaac Asimov is kind of one of the most legendary science fiction writers of all time, a big influence on Elon Musk, so inspiration to what a lot of what Elon is doing. In terms of kind of humans becoming metal, we see that all the time with prosthetics. Basically, a lot of humans have prosthetic limbs, and they can be extremely effective. I think humans can race on the prosthetic legs faster than real runners, especially when they have that bouncy kind of round shape at the bottom of their feet. But over time, yeah, a lot of our bones can be replaced. My sister has metal rods down her back, and many people have similar things like that. So that is really coming. That is basically here, and it's been here for a while. In terms of the robots becoming organic, we're still pretty far out from that. At the moment, we're working on humanoid robots to be metal and kind of work like humans, but we do have silicons that are very human-like, and those can be extremely effective as well. And so you basically will be able to dress your Optimus robot with skin, and even heating it up and making it warm, giving it a human texture. That isn't far out. But actually, organic robots, we're pretty far from that. That is more common on the micro level, so like miniature robots that can act in the human body to deliver medicine and other things like that. Those can much more commonly be made from organic matter, but less humanoid robots. But what he does say, kind of society is shifting and the end of society is coming. That is definitely true, because we may be the last generation of like truly biological humans. So have kids, people, because your kids probably won't be having more kids. eventually our intelligence may evolve to something much greater, some form of artificial intelligence.
That's true. And, ultimately, there's all kinds of advanced things. We have, Elon Musk has a company, Neuralink, that's actually bridging the gap between the disabled who can't control their limbs to actually go and control robotic devices, limbs and so forth, move cursors around a TV screen and so forth. And, the future is going to be, I think, a great thing for a lot of individuals who right now are kind of need that bridge. The clip that we're going to show now shows just an example of things that are being done. This is a guy in an office controlling a full-size excavator at a work site remotely. There's no human inside the machine. And it's a very quick video, but what do you think the next iteration of this will be as we play it?
Yeah, obviously no human in the loop, but let's watch this first.
Okay, here we go.
Is there any audio to this?
No. And what you're seeing is, again, a full-size excavator. There's someone sitting at a control panel. Think of like a simulator, watching cameras and moving and fully controlling the excavator. So, I mean, as it stands, this technology would allow people to work in construction without having to be on the construction site. They would move the equipment there, and you would robotically control the equipment. And again, like Joseph said, I mean, ultimately, what's the next iteration of this? The human gets eliminated from the equation, and AI is controlling the equipment. The equipment.
Exactly. This guy may be thinking, "Oh, this is an upgrade. Instead of being out in the sun, I'm sitting in an air-conditioned office. This is nice." But what he doesn't realize is all he's doing is he's training the AI to replace him, right? So as the AI watches and learns from his actions, it'll learn to imitate and then replicate, and at the end of the day, eliminate his actions. So he is training his successor, and yeah, that is the future. I mean, we've already seen this with like heart operations being conducted halfway across the world. So doctors in the US can, help save lives in Kenya because the hospital doesn't have a heart surgeon, and the heart surgeon in the US is able to put his hands into gloves and basically control a robot with much higher accuracy, sometimes than even he can do kind of himself. So yeah, that, and then again, what he's really doing is just teaching the robot how to heal a heart without the human needed at all, without the surgeon.
And that's for all kinds of surgeries. Heart surgery is one example, but most surgeries now are minimally invasive, and many we use some sort of robotic technology where the surgeon may be in the room, but they're not directly touching the instruments that are operating on the patient. They're touching a joystick, which controls the instruments, which are actually performing the surgery.
It allows for much more accuracy.
Yes, much more accuracy. They obviously requires training and practice, but just like you said, it opens the door to having some of the most skilled surgeons not be necessarily having to be flown across the world. It doesn't mean that there's no surgical staff there, but it means that the lead surgeon might not be there. And I think, again, unless somebody's undergone one of these procedures or has been following this, to a lot of people, they're not aware that this is what's happening. I mean, right now, this isn't like 20 years from now. The technology is there, and I think we like bringing examples of things that people can touch and feel in their everyday world, which is the next video we have queued up, which, very short, but very symbolic of a tremendous shift that's coming very soon.
Yeah, just end that last point, though. In my recruiting company, we recently spoke to a doctor we're going to place, and he was going to kind of potentially replace another doctor. And we're like, okay, awesome. Where are you going to go? And he said, oh, we're actually having a research. This is an OBGYN. We have a research project on how to use robotics for OBGYNs. And I'm kind of going to go to spearhead that. And it was like, wow, that's fascinating. And it's like OBGYN, giving birth, that's like the last thing you'd associate anybody would want a robot to do. But even their robots are being trained. So that, yeah, just a funny anecdote that's kind of relevant. But let's go ahead and watch this.
Here we go.
so that is from Tesla's 1010 event, which was almost 6 months ago, remarkably. Maybe actually over 6 months ago. And where it was called the iRobot event, where they showed off their self-driving car. That's the robotaxi we just got to see. What's special about that is their ability to mass manufacture it extremely affordably. So they basically took the Model 3 and simplified the vast majority of parts and processes. So it'll be much more affordable to produce. So they'll be able to just print these. Like we said, Waymo, sure, they have self-driving cars that work in certain neighborhoods, but they cost $350,000 to $500,000 each, and are possibly a lot of the time remotely controlled. Whereas this robotaxi is going to cost probably $25,000 to $30,000 to buy. It'll probably cost Tesla eventually. They'll probably work down to like $20,000 to produce, maybe even less. And they're just going to be everywhere. And along with that, they also showed the Robovan, basically, which is kind of like a bus version that looks super comfy and very, very futuristic. So yeah, this all kind of seems like sci-fi now, but anybody who has a Tesla with FSD kind of knows how realistic this is already. And like we said, coming to Texas in June. So that's very exciting. Another thing from that event was we got to see a pretty good glimpse of the Tesla's humanoid robot named Optimus. And yeah, just a short clip to end on a fun note, I think.
And before we get to Optimus, just to be clear, when you mention FSD, for the folks that aren't really following what's going on with Tesla, so full self-driving, Tesla vehicles can be purchased with the ability to drive themselves. The hindrance is that various laws prevent the vehicles from driving without an actual driver. For those not watching the video that just played, the robotaxi is a vehicle that's unlike any other. It has no steering wheel. So the vehicle is completely autonomous. The person sitting in the vehicle is not actually driving it. The vehicle is driving itself. And maybe you can speak just a little more for those not familiar with the concept of the robotaxi. And then queued up next is the Optimus robot having some fun.
Yeah, so just in terms of the robotaxi, I mean, the way you mentioned it, it sounds really scary because you're going to get into a box that's going to drive you at 80 miles an hour and you have no control over it, right? So that is very scary. And a lot of people are like, I will never get into a robotaxi in my life. Like, that is not happening. Interestingly, there was a very similar case scenario about 100 years ago. So when humans, when I think it was Schindler invented the elevator. People originally, there was what was the name, like an elevator boy, bellboy, who would basically open the elevator door for you, close the elevator door for you, and press the button for you. He wasn't a technician. He didn't have any master capabilities. He couldn't fix things that broke. But people were afraid of going into a box that can go up and down, tens of meters a second, which is pretty quick, with, no control. Like, how would you even do that? That's terrifying. So just by having the bellboy stand there and welcome you in and press the button for you, and he's just there. So if he's there, he's in control and everything's okay, really calmed people down to this concept. But pretty quickly, people realize, wait, we don't actually need somebody to press the button for us. We can press the button ourselves, and that will reduce cost tremendously. And nowadays, everybody gets into a robotaxi. We just call an elevator because it's vertical, right? And it goes up and down, and we don't even think about it twice. We don't fear it. There are buildings that have, elevators that'll go over 100 stories within seconds. So yeah, even though humans are kind of naturally afraid of getting into a box that will move very rapidly and can plunge to your death, evidence has shown that once people kind of get used to it, they're like, wait, we don't actually need a human to open and close the door for me. I can do this myself, right? I can press the button and it'll save a lot on cost. And suddenly every apartment building can have an elevator. So same kind of thing with robotaxis. People may be like, I'm never going to get into a robotaxi in my life. Once you do, once you see how it drives, once you see how smooth it is, it's kind of inevitable. That does leave to some scary futures in case AI kind of gets compromised. The critical thing about Tesla's full self-driving is that it is run locally on the car. It's not dependent on the internet. It doesn't require any connectivity, and it runs on the local model. So um, basically, nobody can hack into your computer to do anything. It's funny, if you have a Jeep car, those have been hacked into for years, and Chrysler and lots of other cars, and they can actually affect many things, including sometimes the acceleration and other things that can easily cause you to be distracted and die. So it's not necessarily that hacking is not a problem. It's that Tesla knows how to do hacking, but also the fact that it's all run locally on your computer, and there are basically redundancies to every single part of the aspect. So every camera, every sensor, there are redundancies to everything. So that way, even if the computer chip fails, there's a backup computer chip that's equally as good. They're actually both running in parallel all the time to see if there are any contradictions. And basically, Tesla updates the entire fleet at once. So the only way for things to go wrong is if somehow basically Tesla sends an update to everything, to all cars, and they all go crazy. And that's kind of a scary thought, but not something I would necessarily worry about, just like I'm not afraid to get into an elevator.
So a couple of points from my perspective. The first is the vehicle I had before this one I have now was a Jeep, and when I was getting it, there had just been a bunch of guys on the internet that posted a video of them taking control of one of their friends' vehicles remotely. And they got the car and they steered it into kind of like a ditch safely, but they took control of the vehicle. They put the heating on, the windshield wipers on, and the person inside the vehicle couldn't get those things to turn off. So it is an important point that some of the vehicles out there that have technology in them have issues. And this had to do, I believe, with the lack of a proper firewall between the infotainment system that plays music and other things and the control systems in the vehicles, which obviously Jeep, after those videos went public, corrected. But that's why companies like Tesla are putting a lot of effort in making sure that these vehicles can't be just controlled by third parties and can't be hacked into. With regards to elevators, first disclosure for Schindler Elevator is I think they would be the first ones to tell you that the amount of elevator accidents are quite remote and rare, and elevators are extremely safe. So we'll put that out there. We don't want people to be scared of going in elevators. But just to show my age, and for those who may not know, I'm quite a few years older than Yo is. So Joe's the older guy, me. And back in my day, when I was a young child, back up in Montreal, Canada, I would go to the Ogilvy department store where they had it was actually mostly a woman. I don't remember ever there being a guy doing this, who was the elevator operator. And it wasn't even buttons. There was this lever that she would control to close, to get the elevator to move up and stop. And she'd stop it in the, right at the proper place on the floor. And there was like this gate that she would open. I mean, I remember it still. I guess I have okay memories still. But that was a long time ago. But I actually was, on the tail end of that era. And I always thought that was one of the coolest things. I love that elevator. I wish, and in some parts of the world, they still have elevators like that. But pretty much
New York City.
Go ahead.
I said New York City.
But in the US and Canada, it's less common, right? It's more of what, in fact, many elevators today are being retrofitted so that when you go up to them, you don't even press the buttons the way you used to. You tell it what floor you're going, and it tells you go to elevator A, B, C, or D, and the elevator will decide which one is the elevator that can route you there the quickest. So the technology, so it just even goes to show that elevators have come a long way. And yes, you can imagine that the people initially going into an elevator could have been, apprehensive. So the same thing with all this. And with that, I guess we'll, this is a clip from the same presentation where Optimus was having some fun. It's very brief.
And back to the Jeep, just to kind of finish that off. One of the difference, though, is that although Jeep may have fixed the future productions to no longer have that lack of firewall issue, they couldn't change retroactively previous cars, at least without them coming into the dealership and some serious work, real recall, where Tesla is able to software update everything remotely. So anytime you hear Tesla had a recall, Tesla's unsafe, it had a recall, it's not a recall, it's just a software update. It gets a software update, you wake up the next morning and it's been optimized for that. Another thing that Tesla does different from traditional car companies, but they do very much closely, like startups and tech companies do, is they participate in kind of white hacker events, and they'll offer prizes to anybody who can hack their systems and show vulnerabilities for their systems. And they'll literally give you $50,000 and a brand new Tesla of your choosing if you're able to break into the Tesla, right? So this incentivizes hackers to try and find the holes in Tesla, but then notify them about it, as opposed to working for the black market or the gray market, etc. So that is kind of a very, very different thing. And recently, I think they just did the same thing for Starlink. SpaceX just announced $50,000 or something if you can hack into Starlink. So.
Okay, and just to make you laugh at me, when I did go in to buy the Jeep, like I said, that had just happened, it was all over the internet. And I specifically looked for a Jeep that didn't have the infotainment system. I specifically said I wanted to find a vehicle on the lot that just had an AM, FM radio and satellite radio. And that was the extent of the technology. And they were like, but no, this other, I said, no, I don't want that. I just want to, I want one with a horn that you can honk the horn. The brakes got to work, and I need to be able to play some music. But that was pretty much it. And that's what I got. I mean, my current vehicle, it doesn't have, the Buick has obviously more modern accoutrements, but that is a true story. I just said, no, I don't want all that. I don't want to have to worry about someone hacking into my car on top of everything else. Thought you'd find that.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and watch this Optimus dancing, so we can end on a cheery note.
All right, Optimus, do your thing.
So that's pretty cool. What's different about Optimus is, who cares? Robots have been dancing for years, right? Like, why is this exciting? And it's like, every one of these robots cost $5 million to develop. So like, what's the point? So to understand this, you have to realize that mass manufacturing of humanoid robots is really coming. So if you try and understand the complexity of manufacturing a humanoid robot compared to, let's say, manufacturing a car, a humanoid robot has far less parts and requires far less processes to manufacture. So less parts means it's cheaper to manufacture. It's smaller. It has less parts. You have to pay for less things. And it's easier to manufacture, and humanoids can actually assemble other humanoids. So the first ones off the production line can actually work on producing the next ones. So it's kind of that reinforcing loop where things just kind of accelerate really quickly. It's like, okay, if we try and break down the amount of parts in one of these humanoid robots compared to a vehicle, and then to try and kind of break it down. So Tesla is able to make a Model 3 and a Model Y very profitably, and their internal costs are probably $30,000, something like that, roughly, per vehicle. It's like a car is easily half the size, half the amounts of parts, half the amounts of processes, probably far less. So let's just say $15,000 to manufacture. And once they start manufacturing themselves, they'll be able to just print these robots. So Elon Musk recently has been saying that there will be tens of billions of humanoid robots on Earth. So basically every human would like to have a sidekick, a butler, somebody who can do errands for you and who can help. But really where it's first going to go to is jobs that are repetitive, dangerous, and boring, specifically jobs that are all three. Maybe like laying roof tiles. Lots of roofers fall and die and get injured on a regular basis. It's a very dangerous job, right? So something like that, working in nuclear reactors, stuff like that. And then working on production lines, lots of repetitiveness, very boring, etc. So when you say, wait, first we're going to need, industry is probably going to need about 8 billion. Right now there are less than 8 billion employees and there's a lack of employees. So let's just say 8 billion employees is going to be enough for factories. And then every human is probably going to want a sidekick, etc. So that's another 8 billion. So we can be looking at tens of billions of humanoid robots in the not very, very distant future. Tesla is able to make over 1 million cars a year. They're close to 2 million cars a year. Manufacturing capabilities, and they're just ramping up. So these robots, just wait till they're able to make a few million of these a year, right? And then you have a whole bunch of other companies. So yeah, these robots are going to be everywhere. So like we said, technology in the past and recent past was mostly software. in the near future, technology is going to be very much affect the physical world around us. I mean, just the amount of gardening you can have when robots are doing it and you don't have to pay some specialist gardener. If the hardware gets really cheap, it seems like the value add is really going to be at the software end. So the cost is you're probably going to be able to get the robot at a very affordable price. People used to say, oh, it's going to be $1 million. Now it's like, wait, this may be, $20,000, $30,000. And and then when you say, wait, if it can work, instead of 8 hours a day, so a regular employee is making $70,000 a year, and this is, 8 hours a day, but this can work 16, maybe 24 hours a day minus short breaks. It can charge even while it's working. It doesn't have to take lunch breaks. It doesn't have to take vacation, doesn't have sick days, doesn't get depressed, doesn't have to take a cigarette break. It doesn't take days off. You don't have to have HR to handle it and to care about and to calculate everything for them. And they don't come negotiating over price, right? So it's basically just the cost of electricity to run them, and then the cost of the AI. So what I think is likely going to happen is the hardware cost is going to be kind of going to come down very, very radically. And then basically you'll get a robot with a certain set of features that are very useful that kind of come included. And then if you want it to be a roofer, you're going to pay another $100,000 or a year or something for the roofer technology. And then it'll install and it'll know how to be a great roofer. And if you need it to be a plumber, you can, train it to do that. So the cool thing is you may have one, and you may be able to say, hey, I only need a plumber for, 2 hours right now. And maybe you'll be able to rent out the kind of plumber AI just for the time you need it. And then the rest of the time it could just be your household bot. And then suddenly you got to change your roof. You order in some new roofing materials and say, okay, now let's install this for the next 3 weeks. You're going to replace the roof. So I think that's where the value add is really going to be. It's not necessarily going to be on the hardware cost, but more likely on the software costs. But it will affect the world completely around us.
Just like with humans, education can be expensive. But I mean, if you think about it, there's a fire, and rather than all the firefighters risking their lives going in, there's toxic chemicals or what have you, you could send the robots in first. And again, if there's a dangerous dispute where law enforcement has to go in, rather than putting human lives at risk first, you could send in the robots, a la RoboCop. But in the past it was science fiction. It's interesting that in the very near term we're going to start seeing some applications. But we can only imagine, like Isaac Asimov, where things will be 5 and 10 years from now. We won't have to wait, as long as he had to for us to get even to the point where we have cars that already are capable of driving themselves, and we're just waiting for all the laws and to catch up and for people to feel comfortable with the technology. So again, interesting talking about it. There'll be a lot more to talk about on this. I think that's pretty much it for this episode, for episode 5. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, just a great YouTube channel. It's called 2 Minute Papers, and just really great when it comes to AI. And he takes all the most advanced AI research and he kind of summarizes it down to a few minutes long, and he gives kind of great videos about that. But what I noticed is that there used to be like a really exciting 2 Minute Papers, development once every few months, and then it became once every few weeks, and then it became once every few days, and now it's basically once every few hours, and it's basically impossible to keep up. And the most smart humans, advanced humans that are fully focused on this can barely keep up. We basically need AI to keep up with the progress of AI. And that's what I've kind of been kind of hammering on again and again, is that it's not just that our current rate of change, which is remarkably crazy, is going to be, continuing to the future. Like you said, how can we even imagine what's going to be 5 or 10 years right now? Even with the current rate of change, we can't imagine what's going to be 5 or 10 years from now. Then we realize that the pace of change is not just still moving forwards, but it's increasing. So the speed at which the change is happening is getting faster and faster and faster. And basically humans are not going to be in the loop for very much longer. And that is a scary thought to end on. But Elon likes to say, if you had a choice of being born at a boring time or at an interesting time, which would you prefer? And we were blessed to be born at the most interesting of times, because this is, like we said, the kind of pinnacle of human civilization and the birthplace of the next civilization, kind of seems creepy because I am a speciesist, and I want humans to succeed for as long as possible. And it's kind of hard for an intelligence that will not very far away from now be much smarter than the smartest of all humans, to like, what will they consider of us? I think we're kind of lucky if they treat us like pets. So if we end up being, super intelligence as robot, robot dog, human dogs, obviously not there to please them, but more there that, we want our pets to be safe, and we don't like if somebody abuses pets, and we want them to be happy and have fun and be satisfied. So that's kind of the most optimistic outcome eventually, but we're still pretty far away from that. Before that happens, basically the times of Messiah, that the kind of concept of a miraculous world where there is an abundance of everything, and kind of peace around the world, and everything is available, and there's just true abundance. That time period seems to be approaching really, really rapidly. So yeah, before AI kind of starts ending humanity, or that is conceivable or something we need to fear, beforehand it will solve all cancers and most diseases and almost all problems. So very exciting of times. We're blessed to be living in the most exciting of times. So
I have a suggestion. In the interim, be kind to Alexa and to Siri, because maybe they'll at least put in a good word for us.
Yeah, although the whole point is that we can curse at them and they don't get offended like a human being. So
Yet. You don't know. They're keeping tabs behind the scenes. You just don't know it yet.
That is true. But hopefully they're smart enough to not be offended by stupid things. So
No.
unlike humans,
They
which
should
are
have a
more-
good sense of humor, and hopefully an ounce of sarcasm built into them that they can tolerate it all.
Exactly. And for that, they really have to be kind of truth optimization machines. And not all AI companies are focused on that. A lot of them have kind of gone down the woke path, unfortunately.
Well, on that note, let's hope everyone else can actually be the same, and we'd all endeavor to also keep an open mind and keep talking, and hopefully not offend too much. And that should be it for this episode. Until next time,
This is the YoJoeShow Podcast. Thank you for joining us.
thanks for coming, and we'll see you again soon.
Awesome. Bye, Joe.
Bye.